The frost came early to Fenmore that year, and it came hard. It settled on the thatch before the harvest carts were even in, silvering the ruts in the lane, turning the mill pond to a sheet of grey glass that no one dared cross. The smell of the village that November was wood smoke and wet wool, and underneath both, the thin sour smell of hunger, which has no other name, and every poor kitchen knows it. Elspeth Carrow knew it better than most. She was the kind of woman a room forgot the moment she left it. Not pretty, not plain enough to be pitied for it, simply unremarked, the way a chair by the door is unremarked until someone needs to sit down. She was 26, and she had buried her mother 2 winters past, and she had kept, of all her mother's goods, only a horn spoon, a Bible with no cover, and a way of knowing food from poison at 10 paces by smell alone. That last was the inheritance that mattered. Her mother had been the hedge healer of Fenmore, the woman sent for when a child ran a fever the physician could not be bothered to ride out for, and she had taught Elspeth the smell of good rye and the smell of bad. Bad rye smelled sweetish, she used to say, sweetish and a little rotten, like an apple left too long in the dark. Good rye smelled of nothing at all. That was how you knew. It was a smell Elspeth had not forgotten, not in 2 years, not in 100. The bell over the almshouse door was ringing when she came up the lane that morning, her breath standing white in front of her, her hands raw from wringing linen since before light. It rang twice a week, that bell, to call the parish poor to the charity line, and it was ringing now, thin and bright over the frozen ruts, calling children out of doorways with their tin cups and their empty sacks. The bread from the hall was going to make someone sick before the week was out. Elspeth did not know that yet. But she would remember, later, that she had thought it, standing in the lane with the bell still ringing, before she had any reason at all to think it. She went in among the others and took her place. She was owed no charity herself, not officially. She earned her bread mending linen for the almshouse matron. But she came on bell days because a girl named Ivy came on bell days. And Ivy's little brother could not yet walk the lane alone. Ivy was 7. She had lost her mother the winter before, to a sickness that came on sudden, a burning in the hands and feet, a raving, and then nothing at all. The physician had called it a fever of the blood. Elspeth's mother, had she lived to see it, would have called it something else. She would have asked what grain the family had eaten that month, and she would not have been surprised by the answer. Elspeth had taken to bringing Ivy scraps ever since. Not because anyone asked her to. She would have done it for any child in that state, and she told herself so plainly, whenever anyone was fool enough to thank her for it. She found Ivy near the front of the line, holding her small brother's hand, the boy barely 3, wrapped in a shawl too big for him. Ivy's face was thin and watchful in the way of children who have already learned that the world does not owe them anything, and means to prove it daily. Before we go any further, if a story like this one is the kind that keeps you company of an evening, take a moment now to subscribe to the channel, so the next one finds you too. The line shuffled forward. A man Elspeth did not know stood near the cart that had brought the flour up from the hall, dressed plain, in a coat too good for a labourer and too worn for a gentleman, watching the distribution with an attention that had nothing idle in it. She marked him only long enough to wonder, briefly, why a stranger would trouble himself to come and watch bread being given to the poor. And then she did not think of him again, because the matron was already breaking the first loaves, and the smell reached her before the bread did. Sweetish, a little rotten, like an apple left too long in the dark. She did not say anything at once. She had learned, over 2 years of being told she imagined things, that the world did not thank a woman for smelling trouble before it arrived. She watched the matron hand the first heel of bread to a boy of 10, watched the boy tear a piece off with his teeth, and she opened her mouth to speak. Ivy got there first. "Don't eat that," Ivy shouted, so loud that the whole line turned, and she pulled her little brother's hand away from his own mouth so hard the boy nearly fell. "It's bad. It's what took Mam." The lane went silent, the kind of silence that has weight to it. The matron said something sharp about a child not shouting nonsense in a charity line. The boy of 10, halfway through his mouthful, looked from the bread in his hand to Ivy's white face and did not swallow. Elspeth moved before she decided to move. She crossed the frozen ruts in 4 strides, took the bread from the boy's hand and broke it open. The inside was mottled, faintly purple at the crumb, the smell rising now that the loaf was broken, unmistakable, sweetish and rotten, exactly as her mother had described it 100 times over 100 years ago that felt like yesterday. "This grain is spoiled. It is not fit for anyone to eat, not one loaf of it." The matron told her to mind her place. Elspeth did not raise her voice. She held the broken loaf up so the whole line could see the mottled crumb, and she said it again plainly, the way her mother had taught her to say true things, without softening them and without apology. "If you feed this to your children, some of them will not wake right in a week's time. I have seen it before. I will not stand here and watch it happen again." She did not ask permission to say it. She did not curtsy to the matron, and she did not soften her voice for the parish overseer who came hurrying out at the noise. She simply stood in the lane with the bad bread in her 2 hands, red to the knuckle with cold, and she would not be moved. The stranger by the cart watched all of it. He did not speak. He did not step forward to be thanked, and no one thought to thank him for anything, since as far as anyone in that lane knew, he was only a grain factor come to see his cargo delivered. He watched Elspeth Carrow refuse to let a line of hungry children eat what she knew would hurt them, watched her take the blame for the disruption onto her own shoulders when the overseer demanded to know who had authorised her to interfere. "I take the responsibility," and not one word more in her own defence. She did not know then that the man by the cart was not a grain factor at all. She did not know that he had come to Fenmore already suspecting that the charity grain sent up from Harwick Hall in his own name was not what the ledgers claimed it to be, and that he had come disguised precisely so that no one in that lane would perform for him, would flatter him, would tell him what a duke wished to hear. She did not know that he had wanted, more than anything that cold morning, to see what an ordinary woman would do when she believed herself watched by no one who mattered. She had just shown him. The overseer took the ruined loaves. The matron, mortified before the parish, dismissed Elspeth from her mending work on the spot, called her a troublemaker, told her Fenmore did not need women who frightened children over bread that had fed 100 families before her. Elspeth did not argue that either. She only took Ivy's hand and her brother's, and walked them home, and refused, when Ivy's aunt tried to press a penny on her at the door, to take a single coin for it. I would have done the same for anyone. It is not a kindness that wants paying. The stranger by the cart watched her go. He stood a long while after the lane had emptied, turning a fold of spoiled bread over in his own gloved hand, and he did not smile, because it was not a smiling matter. But something in his face had changed, the way still water changes when a stone goes into it, quiet, and then not quiet at all. By evening word had gone round Fenmore that the healer's daughter had lost her place at the almshouse for making a scene over good charity bread, and most of the village thought her a fool for it, and a few thought her worse. Elspeth heard both opinions and answered neither. She sat by her own cold hearth that night, with Ivy's shout still ringing in her ears, and she thought, not for the first time, that being right and being believed were two different countries, and a poor woman rarely got a passport to the second. She did not know, as she banked her small fire and lay down in the dark, that the man from the cart had ridden back to Harwick Hall that same night and gone straight to his study without removing his coat, and sat a long while at his desk with a ledger open in front of him that did not balance, thinking of a woman in a frozen lane who had asked nothing and been given nothing, and had not once looked to see if anyone of consequence was watching before she did what was. Right. He was the Duke of Harwick. His name was Gideon Vane. And he had just found, without meaning to look for it, the first true thing he had seen in his own parish in a year. 2 mornings later, a man calling himself Mr. Holt came to the almshouse asking after a woman skilled in herbs, saying he had been sent by the estate to look into the grain stores, and required someone who could tell good rye from bad by more than a ledger's word. The matron, glad to be rid of the whole embarrassing business, sent him straight to Elspeth Carrow's door, and told him, not unkindly, that if anyone in the parish could smell trouble in a sack of flour, it was her. Elspeth opened her door to a plain-coated stranger she did not recognise as the man from the cart, because she had barely looked at him then, and would not have known a duke from a drover if he stood in her own kitchen. He asked, in a voice that gave away nothing of who he was, whether she would come to Harwick Hall and look at the grain stores for a fair wage, and tell him honestly, without fear of her answer costing her anything, what she found there. She looked at him a long moment. She did not trust easily. I lost one place this week for telling the truth about bread. I should like to know, before I lose another, whether you actually want the truth, or only want to be told you already have it. I want the truth. That is the whole of what I want. She studied his face, and found nothing in it she could call a lie, though she could not have said what she was looking for. She agreed to come the following morning, for a wage that was more than fair, and she did not know, as she shut her door on him, that she had just accepted employment from her own landlord, the man whose name was on every loaf of bread in the parish, the man who had stood in a frozen lane 2 days before and watched her hold up spoiled rye with her own bare hands, and decide, then and there, that he had finally found someone worth the trouble of knowing. The frost held all that week, and under it, in Harwick Hall's cold stone larders, something far worse than frost was waiting to be found. Harwick Hall smelled. On the morning Elspeth Carrow first walked its service passages, of beeswax and old stone, and, somewhere beneath both, the faint mineral tang of a house too large to ever be entirely warm. She was shown down to the grain stores by a maid who plainly thought her strange for being sent for at all, and left there with a lantern, 3 locked bins, and instructions to wait for Mr. Holt. He came within the 1/4 hour, and set about opening the bins himself, without ceremony, as though he had done manual work before, and had not forgotten how, which struck her as odd in a land agent. Though she did not remark on it, she put her hand into the first bin and drew out a fistful of rye, and brought it to her nose, and felt her stomach turn before her mind had finished naming why. Sweetish, this is the same grain that was in the loaves at the almshouse. It has been sitting somewhere damp, weeks at the least. This bin is marked as new stock, purchased a fortnight past, by order of the estate, at half the price of the miller's usual rye. Then, Someone is buying spoiled grain cheap and selling it to your almshouse as whole. Someone is pocketing the difference and calling it charity. He was quiet a long moment, turning a handful of the tainted rye over in his fingers exactly as he had turned it over on the night she had not seen him do it. That is what I have begun to suspect. I would rather know for certain than suspect it forever. They worked the bins together most of that morning, and she found she did not dislike the work, or the man doing it beside her, who asked plain questions and did not flinch from plain answers, and who called her Miss Carrow in a voice that made the courtesy sound meant rather than merely correct. He asked once, careful in the asking, how she had come to know grain so well for a woman who kept no shop and owned no land. My mother. She healed what the physician wouldn't ride out for. She taught me to smell trouble before it reached a person's mouth. It did not save her from anything in the end, but it has saved others since. He did not offer sympathy, which she was grateful for, since sympathy from strangers had always felt to her like being handled. He only said, "It sounds a harder inheritance than most people are given," and let the silence after that stand, which she found, unexpectedly, to be its own kind of kindness. She learned, over the following days, that Mr. Holt kept strange hours and stranger habits for a land agent. He rode out alone in weather that would have kept a hired man by the fire. He asked after tenant families by name, as though their circumstances were a private accounting he meant to keep for himself rather than for any master. Once she came upon Mrs. Hartley, the housekeeper, quietly instructing a footman to carry a basket to a widow 3 miles off, and asked, out of nothing more than habit, who had ordered it. Mrs. Hartley looked at her a beat too long before answering. Someone who does not care to have his name on it, and went back to her ledgers, and would say no more, and Elspeth, being a woman who respected other people's silences as she wished her own respected, did not press. It was Ivy who told her, without meaning to reveal anything, that the doctor who had come to see her brother's cough the week before had refused payment, saying it had already been seen to. Elspeth asked by whom. Ivy did not know, only that a man had come to the door 2 nights, running with wood for the fire, and would not give his name, and Ivy's aunt had cried over it, from gratitude, which was not a thing Ivy's aunt did easily. Elspeth thought of this at odd hours, the way one thinks of a loose thread without yet deciding to pull it. She and Mr. Holt found more spoiled bins as the week wore on, 3 in 10 by his count, all bought at a price too good to be honest, all approved for purchase by the same signature in the estate ledgers, a signature belonging to Lady Seraphina Voss, the Duke's cousin, who had managed the parish charity accounts since before the old Duke's death, and was, by every account Elspeth had heard in the village. Not a woman to be crossed. Mr. Holt's face, when he found that signature for the 3rd time, did something Elspeth had not seen it do before. It closed, the way a door closes, quietly and completely. She has managed this estate's charity for 6 years. I trusted her because I did not want the trouble of not trusting her. Elspeth said nothing to that, because it was not hers to comfort, and she had already learned that a duke's agent, whoever he truly was beneath the plain coat, carried some grief of his own that he did not offer up for handling any more than she offered up hers. But she noticed, filing it away the way she filed away smells and symptoms, that he spoke of trust the way a man speaks of a wound that has healed wrong and aches before rain. She did not ask what had taught him to be wary of people who wept prettily and meant nothing by it. She would learn that later, and not from him first. For now there was only the work, the bins, the cold mornings, and a growing, careful, unlooked-for ease between a woman who had lost her place for speaking a plain truth, and a man who had hired her for exactly that reason, and had not yet told her why it mattered to him more than she could possibly guess. Lady Seraphina Voss came to Harwick Hall on a Tuesday, in a carriage too fine for the weather, and found Elspeth Carrow on her knees in the grain store passage, sorting spoiled rye into a sack for the swine, her hands black with mould and dust to the wrist. She stood in the doorway a long moment before she spoke, taking in the sight the way a woman takes in something she intends to enjoy describing later. Her laugh, when it came, arrived in 3 practised beats, bright and empty as a struck bell. And who is scrubbing my grain stores in servant's wool with a healer's hands? I did not know we had taken to hiring beggars by the hour. I am looking into the charity grain, my lady. Some of it is spoiled. All grain is spoiled by someone's account, if you look hard enough for a reason to make trouble. She let her eyes travel over Elspeth's worn him, her raw hands, the smear of mould on her cheek where she had wiped it without a handkerchief to spare. It must be gratifying, to a woman with nothing else to recommend her, to imagine herself indispensable to a duke's household. Tell me, is it your hands or your face that you hope will be remembered here? I confess I cannot decide which is the poorer investment. The passage was narrow and cold, and 3 servants had paused within earshot, pretending not to listen. Elspeth felt the old habit rise in her, the one her mother had taught without meaning to, the one that said a woman like her did not answer back to a woman like this, not ever, not for any reason. She set the old habit aside. I have neither hands nor face worth remarking on, my lady. I have only eyes, and I have used them. There is mould in 1/3 of your charity bins. Children have already been sick from it. If that is the poorer investment, I do not know what you imagine the richer one to be. Lady Seraphina's smile did not move, but something behind it did. How very improving. I shall remember that a hedgewoman lectured me on investments the next time I dine with anyone worth repeating it to. She swept past without waiting for an answer, her skirts stirring the dust Elspeth had just swept clean, and did not look back. Elspeth did not cry. She had learned long before that passage not to cry where it showed, and she did not begin the habit fresh for Lady Seraphina Voss's benefit. She finished sorting the sack of ruined rye, her hands steady, though it cost her something to keep them so, and she was still at it an hour later when Mr. Holt found her. He had heard, from a footman too rattled to keep the tale to himself, most of what had passed in the passage. He stood in the doorway a moment, the same doorway, and said nothing at first, which she was grateful for, because she did not think she could have borne being asked if she was well. You did not answer her the way she expected. I did not answer her the way I wanted to, either. I wanted to say a great many things. I said the true ones instead, because they were shorter, and because I did not wish to give her the satisfaction of watching me lose my temper over a hem she did not pay for. Something in his face, at that, came very close to a smile, though it did not quite arrive. That is the most dignified sentence I have heard spoken in this house in a year. She looked at him properly then, for perhaps the first time since the frozen lane she had never known he stood in, and found herself wondering, briefly and without quite knowing why, what a man who spoke like that was doing keeping a land agent's hours and a land agent's coat. She did not ask. But that night, walking home in the early dark, with the mould still under her fingernails, she found she was less angry at Lady Seraphina Voss Then she was grateful, in a small and reluctant way, for a stranger who had stood in a doorway and not once asked her to be smaller than she was. The reckoning, when it came faster than either of them expected. By the week's end, Lady Seraphina had gone to the parish overseer herself and laid a complaint, not against the spoiled grain, which she denied existed at all, but against Elspeth Carrow, calling her an interfering woman of no standing, who had taken it upon herself to slander the Duke's charity and frighten honest tenants out of accepting alms freely given. She produced, for good measure, a rumour that Elspeth had been dismissed from the almshouse for theft, which was not true, and which she knew was not true, and repeated anyway, because it served. Word reached Elspeth before Mr. Holt could warn her of it. She heard it first from Ivy's aunt, who came to her door white-faced and apologetic, saying the overseer had been asking questions in the village, and that folk who owed their winter bread to Harwick Hall's goodwill were not eager to be seen taking the side of a woman accused of biting the hand that fed them. She understood, within the hour, what it would cost the families she had tried to protect if she stayed, and fought the accusation loudly. Lady Seraphina had made it plain, without saying so outright, that the charity itself might be withdrawn from any household seen to support the troublemaker. It was not a threat spoken aloud. It did not need to be. Elspeth went to Harwick Hall that evening and told Mr. Holt plainly that she would not be returning to the grain stores. "I have done what I can do. If I go on, she will make it a war between herself and every poor family in this parish. And they will lose it, because they always lose it. I will not be the reason a widow's coal gets cut off in December. You have found real corruption in this estate's charity. I am closer to proving it than I was a fortnight ago, because of you. You cannot simply I can, and did not raise her voice, because raising it had never once made her more believed. I have no standing to protect. I have only my name, and it is worth nothing to anyone but me. I would rather keep it clean and quiet than spend it shouting at a woman who has already decided what I am." He looked at her a long moment, and she thought, though she could not have said why, that he understood exactly what she meant, and hated that he understood it. "I will not ask you to stay and be used as a target, but I do not think this ends with your leaving." It very nearly did, in her own mind. She walked home that night through a cold that had teeth in it, past the almshouse where the bell hung silent, past Ivy's darkened window, and she told herself, as she had told herself before, that being right did not make a thing safe, and that safety, for a woman like her, was worth more than being proven correct in a passage no one of consequence would ever be made to answer for. She did not know, walking home in that cold, that the man she had left standing in the grain store passage had already decided before she was halfway down the lane that whatever it cost him, he would not let this be the shape her story ended in. Mrs. Hartley found Elspeth 2 days later, mending at her own cold hearth, and did not wait to be asked in before she sat herself down across the small fire, uninvited, with the particular set of a woman who has decided a silence has gone on long enough. "You have got it all wrong in your head. About him. About all of it. I have not thought about him at all. The wood that came to the widow Trent's door in the dead of November. The doctor who saw to Ivy's brother and would not take a fee. The rent on 3 cottages that has not been collected in a year, though the account books show it paid in full, because someone pays it quietly out of his own purse rather than let the tenants go without. You did not think a land agent did all that on a land agent's wage, did you?" Elspeth's needle stopped in the linen. I did not think about it at all, and this time it was true only because she had refused to let herself. He asked me not to say who it was. I have kept it, because it was his to keep, not mine to give away for the pleasure of seeing someone's face when they learn it. But I am tired of watching two honest people misunderstand each other out of good manners. His name is not Holt. It never was. He is the Duke of Harwick himself, and he came to that frozen lane in a plain coat, because he wanted to see, just once, what an honest woman did when she believed no duke was watching her do it. Elspeth sat very still. The fire popped once, and settled, and she found she could not, for a long moment, make her mouth produce a single word. He stood in that grain store passage, and let Lady Seraphina call you a beggar to your face, and said not one word to stop it, because he did not yet know how to tell you who he was, without you thinking he had bought your good opinion with a title. He has been trying, ever since, to find a way to tell you the truth that did not feel like a trick played on you. I do not think he has found it. I think he is afraid he has waited too long. Elspeth thought of the passage, of his face closing like a door when he found Lady Seraphina's signature in the ledger, of the housekeeper who would not say who sent wood to a widow's door, of a man who had watched her hold up spoiled bread in a frozen lane, and had said nothing then about who he was, only that he wanted the truth. I refused thanks from him the whole time. I told him I would have done it for anyone. I meant it as a kindness. I think he heard it as something else. I think he heard it as the first true thing anyone has said to him in this house in a very long while, and did not know what to do with a woman who meant it and did not want anything back for it. He is not a man built for being lied to sweetly. His last betrothed did that rather well, before the end of it. He has not trusted a soft word since. She left Elspeth alone by her own small fire, with a fact too large for the room to hold, and Elspeth sat with it a long while, her needle idle in her lap, thinking of every plain thing she had said to a man she had believed to be nobody, and finding, to her own quiet astonishment, that she did not regret a single word of it. The tribunal was held in the estate's long hall, cold despite the fires lit at both ends, and half the parish came to see it, because Lady Seraphina's complaint against Elspeth Carow had, by then, become entangled with a full accounting of the charity grain, demanded not by the overseer, but by the Duke of Harwick himself, who had returned to Harwick Hall 3 days prior under his own name and title, and had not been seen in a plain coat since. Elspeth stood near the back, having been asked to attend as a witness to what she had found in the grain store, and watched the Duke she had known as Mr. Holt take his own chair at the head of the hall, dressed as what he was, and felt the whole room's understanding of the past fortnight rearrange itself around her in real time. Whispers ran the benches. She kept her chin level and her hands folded, and did not look as though anything in her had moved, though everything in her had. Lady Seraphina's defence, when it came, was all fine language and no substance. An insistence that spoiled grain was an invention of a jealous woman with designs above her station. That the accounts had always been managed honestly. That a duke ought not take the word of a hedge-healer's daughter over his own blood. She laughed once, in the middle of it, 3 practised beats, and for the first time Elspeth saw the sound land on no one at all. The hall had gone too still for laughter. The Duke did not raise his voice. He laid the ledgers on the table before him, the ones Elspeth had helped him read, the signatures, the prices, the dates, and said, plainly, that he had verified every figure himself, in the company of the very woman his cousin had accused of slander, and that the grain had indeed been bought spoiled, and sold to the parish poor as whole, at a profit that had gone, every shilling, into an account bearing his cousin's name alone. I do not say this to shame you before this hall. I say it because a woman with nothing stood in a frozen lane and told the truth about bread when it would have been easier, and safer, to say nothing at all. She has been called a beggar and a liar in this house for it. I will not sit in this chair and let that stand uncorrected. Lady Seraphina was asked to withdraw from the management of the parish charity, effective that hour, and it was suggested to her, in terms polite enough for the record, and cold enough for no one in that hall to mistake their true meaning, that Bath's society might suit her better than Fenmore's, for the foreseeable future. She left the hall without her laugh, and no one in the room found it in themselves to miss it. Elspeth was called forward once, to confirm what she had found in the grain bins, and did so plainly, without embellishment, and sat down again as quickly as she was permitted. She did not look at the Duke while she spoke. She found she could not. Quite. Not yet. Not with the whole parish watching to see if she would. It was only afterward, when the hall had emptied and the fires had burned low, that Mrs. Hartley found her near the door, and told her, quietly, that his Grace wished a word, in his study, whenever Miss Carrow found it convenient, and not one moment before. Elspeth stood a long while in the cold passage outside that study door, before she raised her hand to knock, thinking of a frozen lane, a plain coat, a bell ringing over hungry children, and a truth she had told without once asking who might be listening. She knocked. A voice she now knew far too well told her to come in. The study at Harwick Hall was small, for a room in so large a house, warm with a fire built up higher than strict economy allowed, and it smelled of beeswax and old leather and, faintly, of the wood smoke that clung to every room in that country in November. Gideon Vane, Duke of Harwick, stood by the hearth when Elspeth came in, and did not sit and did not ask her to. I owe you an accounting, not the estate's, my own. She said nothing, because she had learned, in a frozen lane a lifetime ago it seemed, that silence sometimes did more work than speech, and she wanted, more than she could easily admit, to hear what he meant to say without her own words shaping it first. I was in that lane. The day the child shouted, I stood by the grain cart in a plain coat, because I had begun to suspect what my own charity had become in my cousin's hands, and I did not want to be told comfortable lies by people who knew whose son I was. I wanted to see what an ordinary woman did, when she believed no one of any consequence was watching her do it. That is the only test, I have come to think, that ever tells the truth about a person, not what they do for a duke's approval, what they do for a hungry child, when they believe the only witness is God and no one else. You saw. I did. You did not curtsy to the overseer. You did not thank me, because you did not know there was anyone to thank, and when the widow's daughter tried to press a penny on you, you would not take it. I have watched a great many people perform goodness in this house for my benefit. I had never, until that lane, watched anyone simply be good, with no one they believed worth performing for. She felt her hands, folded in front of her, go very still, the way they went still when she meant to keep them from shaking. Why did you not tell me? All these weeks. In the grain store, in the passage, when she called me a beggar to my face, and you said nothing. I did not know how to tell you without it becoming the only thing you saw when you looked at me. A title, sitting between us where a plain coat had been. I have been lied to sweetly before, by someone who wept very prettily and meant nothing under it, and I have not since trusted a person who tells me what I wish to hear. You never once told me what I wished to hear. You told me the truth about spoiled grain when it cost you your place, and you told me the truth about my own cousin's cruelty in a passage where 3 servants stood listening, and you never asked, not once, what it might buy you to say it plainly instead. I did not want that to end the moment you learned my name. It has not ended. He looked at her a long moment, the fire between them casting more warmth than the room strictly needed. I am not offering you a duke's hand out of gratitude for a kindness done to a child. I want to be plain about that, because you have never once let me be anything less than plain with you, and I will not begin insulting you now. I am asking because I have not, in all the years since my father died and left me this house, met a single soul who told me the truth for no reason but that it was true. I would like the rest of my life to be spent near someone who does that. I will not press you for an answer tonight, or this week, or this season if you need it. I would rather have your no honestly given than a yes you felt this house had cornered you into. Elspeth stood a long while in the warm study, the cold ordeal of the hall still fresh in her, and found that for the first time in longer than she could easily remember, no one in the room was asking her to be smaller, or quieter, or grateful, and she did not quite know what to do with the sudden unfamiliar space of it. I should like some time, not because I doubt you, because I have never once in my life been asked what I wanted, and I find I do not yet know how to answer quickly. Take whatever time you need. I will be here. She left the study that night with her hand steady, though her heart was not, and walked home under a sky gone suddenly, uncharacteristically clear, thinking that a man who could say I will not press you and mean it had already answered a question she had not known, until that moment that she was still asking. Winter loosened its hold slowly, the way it always does in that country, a thaw here, a hard frost there, until one morning in the first week of the new year, Elspeth woke to find the icicles off her own eaves dripping steadily onto the sill, and knew, the way one knows such things without being told, that she had made up her mind some days before, and had simply been waiting for the weather to agree with her. She walked to Harwick Hall that morning without sending word ahead, and found the Duke in the grain store, of all places, going over the new stores himself with a lantern, as though the habit of checking his own charity with his own hands had become one he did not care to give up now that he had it. You are checking rye again. I find I trust my own nose for it more than any steward's word now. Habits acquired from good teachers are hard to lose. She came further into the room, past the bins that no longer smelled of anything sweetish or rotten, only of clean grain and cold stone, and she found she had, after all, very few words prepared for what she had walked 3 miles in the thaw to say. I have thought about it. The time you gave me. I did not need all of it. In the end, he set the lantern down very carefully, the way a man sets something down when his hands are not quite steady and he does not wish it to show. And I find I do not want a duke. I want a man who tells me the truth even when it costs him something, and who does not need me to perform gratitude for kindnesses I never asked for, and who will let me be plainly spoken in his own house without calling it unbecoming. If you are also, as it happens, a duke, I suppose I shall have to manage that as well. Something in his face did, this time, arrive all the way into a smile, unpractised and a little crooked, as though the muscles required for it had gone stiff from disuse. That is the least romantic acceptance I believe I have ever heard offered to any man in this county, and I do not think I have ever wanted to hear one more. Yes, it was the only word she needed. He crossed the small distance between the bins to where she stood, and took her hand, the one still red at the knuckle from years of cold water and mending, and drew the worn glove from it finger by finger, slowly, as though the unwrapping of it were itself a kind of vow, and pressed his mouth once to her bare palm. I would rather have this hand honestly given than every soft-spoken yes I was ever offered before it. She did not cry. She had learned long ago not to cry where it showed, and she did not begin the habit that morning, in the grain store, with the last of the frost dripping off the eaves outside. But she laced her bare fingers through his, and did not let go, and found that some truths, once spoken plainly enough, did not need to be said again. There was a wedding at Harwick Hall before the spring planting, small as a duke's wedding is ever permitted to be, which is to say that half the county came anyway and called it modest, and Ivy stood at the front of the church in a new coat that fit her, holding her small brother's hand exactly as she had held it in the frozen lane the day she had shouted the truth loud enough for a duke to hear. It changed his whole understanding of a woman he had not yet dared to name to himself. A year later, on an evening with the first real chill of autumn in it, Gideon and Elspeth Vane sat together by the fire in that same small study, her bare hand laced in his, and watched the light move over the room the way it had moved the night she gave him her answer. Ivy, grown taller and steadier, and no longer thin in the way that worry makes children thin, came in twice to be certain the fire was well built, because she had appointed herself its guardian and would not be told otherwise, and was sent off both times with a slice of bread from the kitchen, cut from clean sweet grain that smelled, exactly as it should, of nothing at all. Lady Seraphina Voss remained in Bath, where her letters, when they came, were read once and set aside, and where her laugh, it was said, had lost its practised third beat entirely, having no audience left worth performing it for. The Widow Trent's roof no longer leaked. The doctor who had once refused a fee sent a bill now, openly, and was paid promptly, because there was no longer any need for secrets in a house that had learned what secrets cost. Mrs. Hartley kept her ledgers as shrewdly as ever, and allowed herself, once a season, the particular satisfaction of a housekeeper who has watched two honest people find their way to each other without her help, though she would tell anyone who asked that it had, in fact, entirely required her help. The bell over the almshouse door still rang twice a week, calling the parish poor to a bread that no child in Fenmore had been sick from since. Elspeth went most bell days still, not because anyone required it of her, but because she had never stopped believing that a kindness which cost nothing to give was worth giving anyway, and a duchess, it turned out, could stand in a charity line and hand out clean bread with her own 2 hands just as well as a hedge-healer's daughter ever had. Gideon watched her do it, sometimes, from a little distance, exactly as he had watched her once, in a frozen lane, before either of them knew what the other would come to mean. He had learned, by then, that the truest thing a person could show him was never the thing performed for his benefit. It was always the thing done when they believed themselves entirely unwatched. That, in the end, was the whole of what he had gone looking for. He had simply not expected to find, at the far end of it, a bare hand laced in his by the fire, that did not, on any evening since, let go. Character, the old saying in that country went long after, is only what a person does when no one of consequence is watching. Fenmore never forgot the winter the bread nearly failed its poorest children, nor the small voice that stopped it, nor the plain woman who held the proof up in her own 2 hands, and asked nothing for it. Some truths, once spoken, simply hold, the way a bridge holds, the way good grain holds through a long winter, quietly, and without needing anyone to notice that they do. If this story warmed something in you tonight, the kindest thing you can do is subscribe to the channel, so these quiet, unwatched kindnesses keep finding their way to you. I would love to know in the comments what you think Elspeth felt in the moment she realised the plain-coated stranger she'd scolded in a doorway was the Duke himself, standing there letting her be right in front of him. Was it fear, or was it, somewhere underneath, relief? Tell me below. And if you have not had your fill of quiet houses and hidden hearts, stay close, because another story like this one is already waiting for you, just around the corner of the next evening.